in 5 planned at the moment, but maybe more, about artificial intelligence and AI. And this first session will be led by Earlybird, so I won't make Claudine wait any longer. But yeah, over to you, Claudine, to kickstart our webinar series.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Henry, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks to those with cameras on that can see your faces. Hello, nice to see you, especially faces that I recognise as well. Yeah, conscious that it's a little bit of a dreary Thursday afternoon, so hopefully I can keep you a little bit entertained on the topic of AI safety. So today, basically, want to really delve into the intertwined relationship between AI, data security, privacy, and really explore how companies are ensuring responsible AI usage whilst respecting individual privacy rights. And really the objective is going to be to dissect a few strategies for ensuring AI's responsible use and the kind of pivotal role that data encryption and safeguarding privacy plays in all of that. Before we get started, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Claudine Adeyemi-Adams. I am the founder and CEO of Earlybird, which I'll tell you a little bit more about shortly. My background, I used to be a lawyer in the city in London, and then fell into tech and entrepreneurship. I actually left home when I was 16 and bounced around in temporary accommodation and had to deal with homelessness, performing lots of low-paid roles to make ends meet. And actually got help from a lot of different types of employability programs myself. And then went on to then later set up my own employability organisation, supporting largely young adults into work, particularly with a quite a heavy focus on those that had originally come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and or were furthest away from the labour market. And then as a result of kind of my experiences and kind of seeing what it's like to deliver that support on the ground over many years, I then ended up looking at ways that we can use technology to create solutions to support the sector. And that ultimately led me to build Earlybird, which is a voice-first AI software that really enables organisations to capture information and insights on their participants and develop that deep understanding of the participants that many of you are supporting. If you want to have a chat with me about Earlybird, then we can do that separately, but I won't go into much more detail other than to just explain that it's simple technology. It's a kind of AI chatbot. You send a link out to your participants, they have a conversation with our AI, and you get the reporting from there. But yeah, happy to chat with anyone that wants to learn more about that separately. So before we get started, when I used to deliver skills workshops for job seekers, one of the things that I learned about was giving everyone a voice at the start of a session. And I know it's a virtual session, so a little bit more tricky to do that, but I thought what we could do is just get started with a few polls, get a sense of who's in the room and what we're all thinking on this topic. So Henry, if you could start the polling, hopefully I can see the response at the same time.
Hopefully people can see that.
I think you have to go to the chat if anyone hasn't done polls in Teams before. Has everyone got that? So the first question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how important do you think AI technology is for the future of employment support? And then you've got that scale there.
The arrow at the bottom, there's 3 questions as well. Sorry to interrupt, Claudine.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if you scroll across, then you'll get to the second question, which is, have you implemented any AI technologies in your employment support service? And then the final question, which is, how concerned are you about the potential risks of AI in the employment support sector? And then we should be able to start seeing some of the results come through. I'll just give everyone a little bit of time to complete those. So I think we've got majority have completed. Henry, have you got the results there? They're not visible to me, so.
Oh, they're not. Okay. Yeah, I do. So that's annoying that you can't see it. But basically, the majority of the answers for question 1 are very important or extremely important. Both of them, 35%, moderately important, 20%, somewhat important, 10%, and not important at all, 0%. Question 2, have you implemented AI technologies in your employment support service? 50-50 split, yes and no. Number 3, how concerned are you about the potential risks of AI in the employment support sector? 80% somewhat concerned, and then 10% very concerned, 10% not concerned at all.
Okay, cool. So yeah, that's really interesting. So it sounds like there's some of you that are at the kind of very early stages of this journey and figuring out whether to even implement any AI technologies, and I guess wanting to get ahead of the curve on that front and think about the things that you should be thinking about before you do that, which is interesting. So we hopefully by the end of this would have alleviated some of those concerns and equipped you with some of the things that you should be thinking about on that front. Cool, so let's get started. So I think obviously everyone's at slightly different stages. So what we're going to do is kind of start with foundations of AI and privacy and just go through some basic definitions in that respect. Then move on to corporate responsibility in AI usage, and then just kind of delve into a little bit on encryption and privacy, and then we'll wrap up. Please do feel free to use the chat if you've got questions as we go, and I'll pause so that we can kind of cover any questions that have come up after each section, and then we can have a Q&A and a bit of discussion at the end if you're up for that as well. So if we therefore start with some definitions. So AI, obviously buzzword, what we're all hearing about, it's on the tip of everyone's tongues at the moment. What actually is it? So we're talking about simulation of human intelligence processes by machines, particularly computer systems. When we think about AI, what we're thinking about at its core is data and algorithms, essentially. The way that I like to talk about it is if you think of it as a recipe. So the data, that's the ingredients in your recipe, and the algorithms are the cooking instructions. So without the data, AI really can't function effectively. And essentially AI is really learning from the data that we feed it. So a really simple way of depicting what that looks like. If you show an AI system a picture of a cat and tell the system through an algorithm that it is a cat, when you then show the picture of the dog, it'll be able to know that that's not a picture of a cat and it's a picture of a dog, right? I think the thing that gets me at the moment is that there's a lot of hype around AI, but AI is not new. So AI systems have been around for decades. The first system was built, I believe, in 1955. But it's getting a lot of airtime now, obviously, because it's just becoming more and more mainstream, particularly with the explosion of large language models like ChatGPT, and the seemingly fast pace at which everything's being built and is continuing to be developed. And obviously that just means that it's becoming more and more accessible to all of us, and to our customers and to everyday consumers. So if we then look at and think about data encryption and privacy, so data encryption, when we talk about encryption, we're talking about the process of converting data into a code to prevent unauthorized access. So imagine that we agree that I will send you a letter with some really important information, and the letter is going to be stored in a box, and it's going to be locked so it's secure. And only the two of us have a key. So where the encryption comes in is that this is not an ordinary lock, it's a magic lock. So instead, when I lock the box, in addition to locking it and securing the box actually turns the letter it's holding into a biscuit. Like the form completely changes, and the only way to get it to change back into a letter and to access that original piece of information is if you use your key to unlock that box. That's basically data encryption. So no other key or any other method of breaking into the box is going to change that biscuit back into the letter, into its original form. And even if someone manages to get into that box, all they're going to have is a biscuit, which could be a tasty biscuit, but it's still not the letter, which is what they're trying to access. And then so with privacy, which I'm sure you're probably more familiar with, because that's something that comes up a lot, regardless of whether we're talking about AI or not, is really kind of thinking about the protection of an individual's personal data, and protecting that from unauthorized access, usage, or misuse. And in this context, we're thinking about the misuse by AI systems. One of the things that comes up quite often is the kind of contention between security and privacy. So I did want to just take a moment to clarify the difference between those two concepts, because they are quite closely linked, but obviously they're different. So when we talk about security, we're really talking about safeguarding against threats such as data breaches or cyber attacks and things like that. So you're really looking at safeguarding the integrity, the confidentiality and availability of data, whereas privacy is a lot more focused on controlling access to personal information and protecting against unethical use of personal data. So I've got this picture of a mansion, not my house, I don't live there, but someone lives there, and you can see that, well, hopefully you can see that the doors, the windows, they're all locked, so it's all secure, which obviously helps to prevent burglaries. But it's not particularly private because actually you can see into the windows on the ground floor. So that's kind of the difference between privacy and security. So you can have really strong security measures in place, but if you or a service that you're using shares your information broadly, your privacy can still be compromised, and vice versa. So we'll move on to corporate responsibility and AI usage, but I just wanted to pause there in case anyone did have any questions about some of those basics. No, I think we're all good and the chat's clear, so cool. So this is a pretty simple, interesting diagram. I decided to include this and share it because it kind of captures the anticipated regulation that's actually coming into force with regards to AI, starting in the EU. So the EU have been first movers to build regulation in this space, and it's called the AI Act for anyone that's interested. It's not enforced yet, so don't panic. You haven't missed anything. You're not complying with anything. Essentially, what it's doing is it's looking at the different use cases of AI and categorizing them based on risk. And that categorization will then impact the obligations on organizations that are building with AI or contracting with parties who are building with AI. Like I said, it's not enforced yet. And even when it does come into force, obviously the UK is separate, so they would have to adopt their own regulations. But I think this is just a really helpful way to start thinking about risk within AI, because I think this will set the standard for regulation of AI and kind of general practices. So just diving into this in a little bit more detail. So the two categories really of concern for us in this sector are really going to be limited risk and high risk. So limited risk will probably be the most common, to be honest. So the impact of most of the AI software that you'll be adopting in your organizations generally aren't going to be making decisions about people that have a real impact on their human rights. So AI chatbots like Earlybird will fall into this limited risk category. And with this, the key thing, as you can see on the screen, is this really important principle around transparency, which comes up a lot when you think about AI safety. And a lot of these concepts aren't new per se, and I think there's an increasing move towards really making it easier to understand, for individuals to understand what personal data is being collected, how it's being used, how they can revoke consent, things like that, which is all around transparency. But in the context of AI, it's just taking it one step further and thinking about the relationship with AI systems as well. So building on those concepts of transparency and thinking about, for example, is there transparency around the fact that AI is even being used in the first place? As an individual that's using this piece of software, are they aware that they're using AI? Are they aware how AI is being used? Is the system being used to detect like their emotional state and using that information to impact the way they interact with the software? And is there transparency around the fact that that's happening? So it's things like that that need to be thought about on the transparency front. And then I think in terms of when we're looking at building AI systems, we'll also start to see requirements for transparency around the underlying data sets themselves. So what's been collected to kind of create those data sets and train the models, and what was the purpose for collecting that data and that kind of thing. So, and making sure that there's transparency around all of that. And then with high-risk systems, I think in this sector, I would say the most relevant really would probably be kind of CV and job application screening tools and things like that, where there is a direct impact on whether or not someone has a job. So you can see on here, employment is then in that kind of high-risk category because it's getting closer to thinking about the human right element that could be impacted by the AI system, particularly if an error is made or there's bias involved. And so at this stage, you would then be required to complete what's called conformity assessments. And that's really just a process of demonstrating that the requirements in the Act have been complied with. So things around technical documentation, record keeping, human oversight, all sorts of things on that front. Like I said, it's not enforced yet, but it's just to kind of get started with thinking about what might be required of you. I assume that the majority of you won't be building your own AI systems from scratch. So a lot of this is more about thinking about what would be what obligations are going to be in place when you are using third-party tools. So you want to be in a position where you can ask the right questions to ensure compliance with some of these concepts, particularly when this kind of regulation does come into force. But before that, to be honest, it's just a matter of ethics, right? Do you want to be doing business with organizations that don't really care about the risks that their systems pose? Do you want to be partnering with those kinds of organizations? And if you do, what does that say about your own values and how will your reputation be impacted by that as well? So yeah, those are kind of some high level things to then start thinking about on that front. So I think if we turn this into some kind of practical guidance in terms of responsible AI usage in business, I think going back to the regulations, I think if you can, it's quite important to stay updated on global AI regulations, partly to kind of ensure compliance. I don't know where all of your businesses are operating, but things will be different depending on where you're based as well. But also because the developments and the conversations that are happening around regulation will give you a bit of an inkling as to the types of things you should be thinking about just generally anyway, and what good practice will look like, whether or not regulation comes in. And generally speaking, all the existing regulation is still relevant, right? So your GDPR, data privacy and regulation acts that are adopted in the UK and elsewhere, they will still be relevant for the purpose of thinking about AI software as with any other software that you might be using. And then I think the next thing that I was thinking about was just really thinking about how you can avoid sharing sensitive data with AI tools. So for example, really making sure that if you are using any of these third-party tools, interrogating the data privacy policies that third-party software has, and asking the right questions, which I'll come on to shortly, around how data is handled, particularly where there's an interaction with an AI system. And then, yeah, setting up internal monitoring and vendor oversight. So, for example, implementing regular audits and assessments to really identify and mitigate potential risks associated with AI algorithms. And also kind of really thinking about how you might be able to influence the development of the AI systems that you're using. So, for example, at Earlybird, by default, we've built our technology to operate with a kind of human-in-the-loop approach, which basically means that the intelligence that is contained in the reports that we deliver are obviously shared with advisors, and then the advisors are taking that and working working with their customers and using that information. But you've got that human element, right? You haven't got something that's completely autonomous, where there isn't a human input, and the system is making decisions about that individual. So kind of looking at opportunities to adopt software that takes that kind of approach, or where you can feed information back into the system as well. So, for example, if you've got something that is making suggestions about career pathways and you've got an opportunity to then feed back into the system in terms of which career pathway someone then ultimately went down, you've got more chance of that piece of software being more accurate and more useful and more valuable to you going forward. One of the other things that we do on this front is we also have an internal quality assurance process. So our team performs audits on the quality of the reports being generated by our AI system, again, to kind of make sure that you've got that accuracy there and you're not seeing issues around bias and things like that. So yeah, just looking at ways that you can get involved in the development of AI systems is also going to be quite useful for you guys. And then I think the final one, and I think it's probably the most important, particularly where you're not building your own AI systems, is just to be asking the right questions to vendors like Earlybird and others that you're using. So I've given some example questions which you may already be asking, but if not, I would definitely add them to your list, because yeah, you should be putting any vendor of AI systems on the spot and asking these questions. You're not allowed to ask me any of them right now, I'm joking, but yeah, you should really be thinking about how you can hold vendors to account and how you can make sure that you are through those vendors using AI responsibly, basically, if that makes sense. I'll pause here before moving on. Just wanted to kind of find out if there are any observations so far, any advice or lessons learned so far that anyone would like to share in terms of the way that they've adopted AI. Feel free to unmute or type into the chat as well. Yeah, don't want it to be a session where I'm just talking at you, but yeah, is there any observations, any questions, any learnings? Yeah, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was really useful. I suppose the question we had was, we've been informally, I suppose, using AI. So our mentors that work with young people to try and get into employment, I suppose off their own backs, using things like ChatGPT and stuff like that. But I'm really keen for us to get some, I suppose, processes in place with it in terms of using it safely. So, for example, if helping a young person write a CV, they might use ChatGPT, but then that concerns you that they're putting in that young person's personal data and details. And so the stuff you've said there is really useful, but I suppose you've recommended not sharing that data with the systems. But how do you combat that if you're looking at someone's CV where what's integral to it is those personal details? If that makes sense in the question.
Yeah, so I think so there's a couple of things on that front. So one, and I was actually going to come onto it a little bit later, but one of the things that we're seeing more and more is organizations buying in software to combat this issue, because when we build software, we're making sure that when you're inputting information into our software, anything going to the AI models is then stripped of personal data, right? And so you've got those safeguards in place, and so that's kind of why some of organizations opt not to use ChatGPT directly or build their own systems, because it's a bit more complex to make sure that you are safeguarding on that front. On the flip side, it's then thinking about if you aren't in a position to buy in software to support with that, just thinking about ways around it. So I think the key thing really is we're talking about personal data here, right? So the way that you think about personal data is really around any piece of information that will allow you to identify someone. So if you imagine that you stripped a CV of someone's name, their address, their phone number, all of that information, if they're putting information about their work history and their skills and things like that, they're not necessarily showing personal data in a sense that they'll be able to be identifiable through that information. So that could be kind of a bit of a workaround in terms of, and the guidance that you could be giving to some of the young people that you work with, where it's kind of like, yeah, you're fine to use this, but just be careful with putting in this set of information, which will allow your personal data to be shared, and that the wider contextual information that you're sharing to be attributed back to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really useful and a quite simple workaround, isn't it, in terms of what is data on that person in terms of address, telephone number, etc. Versus, yeah, just a career history or their education wouldn't necessarily be identifiable to them, would it? So that's really helpful. I think what we don't want to do is, teach grandma to suck eggs in terms of our mentors having to completely change their ways, but that really feels like it can enhance it.
Yeah, and I think you can do it in a simple way, like, just having a bit of a do's and don'ts. Yeah, and easy to kind of follow guide or something like that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions or observations or? No, I can keep talking. That's fine. Cool. So I come on to encryption and privacy. So obviously we're, I guess, in an era where vast amounts of data is now being collected everywhere in all the systems that we're using every day. Vast amounts of data is being processed, analysed, and within all of that, it just means that data encryption and privacy becomes even more important. We've obviously spoken about what data encryption means, so really that kind of process of scrambling data so that it's completely unreadable and unusable in this new format, and so we use those specific keys to unencrypt that data. I think it's important to recognise that data can be encrypted both where it's being stored as well as whilst it's being transmitted, like the example that I gave before where I'm sending a letter in a box. But the data encryption side of things, in our view, is the absolute last line of defence. So before you even get to having to rely on the fact that, this data is encrypted, what we should be doing, and whether you're talking about AI or not, frankly, is observing really robust security practices in your organization. So using standards like Cyber Essentials Plus or the ISO regs or whatever it is that you're using to kind of help guide you through with the security practices and standards that will help make sure that any data that you're housing within your organization and within the systems that you have is secure. And then again, going back to this point around asking questions of your vendors, making sure that they're also observing with, those types of policies and things as well. And then on the data processing protocols side of things, this is really just about aligning data processing activities with your customer agreements and privacy standards. Again, not particularly unique to AI, but incredibly important starting point. With the use of AI in the mainstream being a relatively recent phenomenon, it means that, and what we're seeing is that, data protection policies and processes are therefore slightly out of date because it hasn't really factored in how you deal with processing data in and around AI systems. So to the point that Matt just made, if you've got people within your organizations who are making use of ChatGPT, have you got something within your employee data privacy policies and internal policies that are talking about, how to the interaction with using that tool when it comes to personal data, that kind of thing. So it's just really thinking about those elements, and also again tying that back into vendors' policies. So for us, we have like standard data protection policies, data sharing agreements, those types of things. But we then work with each customer that we onboard to agree the ways in which that we'll process personal data that enables them to observe their own obligations and policies internally as well. And then we've got AI bias and fairness, obviously super important. You want the underlying training data of your AI systems to be diverse and representative so that fair AI systems are built. And that's particularly the case where you've got systems that are making decisions about people. So whether they get the job in the first place, whether they are being directed to pursue a particular career path. You really want to make sure that there isn't inherent bias involved in those systems. One of the things I was reflecting on for us that we get asked a lot is how our product, because we use voice technology, how it supports different accents with the natural language processing techniques that we have. Thankfully, because we use state-of-the-art AI models, which have been trained on huge amounts of diverse data, our software works really well with accents. And the way that our product works overall means that there's obviously this additional oversight as well. So you're not typically making decisions purely based on the information that comes out of our software. because it's really helping the advisor to better understand their customer, and they take that as I've shared. And then it's built in some kind of workarounds as well, where we're kind of doing triage type work with organizations. But yeah, so I think generally speaking, again, it's just really thinking about how are organizations putting processes in place to deal with AI bias, which is a very common problem when it comes to building with AI. And then finally, just looking at safe data exchange. So this is really all around how data is being exchanged between an organization and an AI system. The best way to ensure data is exchanged safely is to actually just train your own custom models, which many of us won't be doing on this call. So where you're not doing that, again, it's really about ensuring secure communication. That's the best available strategy, really. So as an example, if we take the concept of privacy preservation in AI, so that's a concept where you're using techniques such as anonymization and things like that to really ensure that data can be analysed whilst protecting the identities of individuals within a data set. So, for example, for us, we make use of large foundational language models in our product. So that requires us to send data to those models, right? But before that data is sent, what we do is we have a process where all of the personal data is stripped from that data set, so that each individual using our software is never at risk of their personal data being misused in any way, because it doesn't go anywhere in the first place. And as I was saying before, we've seen a lot of corporates actually ban the use of ChatGPT, of Gemini, formerly Bard, for this very reason, because you've got employees who aren't aware of the fact that they're sharing either personal data, but even just confidential or sensitive data directly into these AI systems without the mechanisms that are in place to strip out that kind of data or manage what gets sent and what doesn't get sent to these models and these systems. So that's really why we tend to have more third-party software being built and used by organisations to observe these practices. So yeah, I'll just pause there again, just in case there are any questions or thoughts or anything like that. Got a very quiet group today. Hoping you guys will speak up. So yeah, please share any observations or any questions. Just check the chat. There's no questions in there. I'm hoping this means that it's just all, I'm just covering everything perfectly. So you're all happy with how it's going. So I'll continue until someone does have a question. So I thought it'd be useful just to cover some of the kind of actionable steps to secure and protect data. You'll see that data encryption sits across both of these. So first and foremost, data is obviously around security, really. But if you think about how encryption works, it's also preventing the personal data from being disclosed as well. So we tend to kind of think about it in both ways. But on the security side, I think a lot of this is probably stuff that you're already doing, but it's just thinking about it in the context of AI as well. Really making sure that you or the vendors that you're buying from have thought about the access control side of things and authentication, and ensuring that only authorized individuals or systems can access sensitive data. So that's going back to the point I was making as well, in terms of what information is actually shared with large language models, for example, if that's what's being used. And having strong passwords and multi-factor authentication and things like that. I think I mentioned before as well around audits and monitoring, and just making sure that you've got processes in place to review these processes as well. And then on the protection of data side of things, there's a concept of data minimization, which I think often gets missed. But that's really where you're just asking yourself the question of whether this personal data needs to be collected in the first place. So at Earlybird, for example, we would only collect personal data that's required to deliver our service. We don't want to be collecting and storing personal data that we don't need, basically. And so, if we collect someone's name, then great, because it means that our customers can then identify who has had that conversation within our technology, but we don't necessarily need to capture their date of birth, for example. So really, I think, we're just thinking about that data minimization side of things, and within the context of AI, again, what information do the third-party tools that you're using actually need, particularly when it comes to personal data, to be able to deliver that service. Because if they don't collect it in the first place, then that's the best form of protection. And then linked to that, if you are collecting it, then it's then thinking about minimizing the usage of that data, which is slightly different. So you've got the data that's been collected, but then how is it being used, and how can you limit how it's being used and processed? And then once it has been used or processed, what's the process then for deleting that data? And then finally, data anonymization, which I have spoken about a fair bit. And then I think overall, as I mentioned before, we're entering into an age where transparency, frankly, just wins. So just really making sure that customers that you're working with and any kind of users of tools that you're using that incorporate AI, which could include internal tools as well, that there is a lot of transparency around the fact that it is an AI system, how AI is being used, how their personal data is being used within the context of that AI system, and giving them really simple ways to consent and revoke their consent where that's appropriate to do so as well. So we've kind of flown through this really quickly because I thought there'd be a bit more discussion, but I just want to just run through some key takeaways. So privacy and security, first and foremost, not the same, but closely related. Need to be thinking about both of these in the context of AI, particularly where tools are leveraging third-party services like large language models. And then secondly, which is the one for me, which is always the most important, is that we're all responsible for making sure that AI is used responsibly. And the best thing that you can do where you're not building your own AI tools is to really just hold vendors to account and really ask them the key questions to make sure that they're observing the ethics and the responsibility of making sure that they're building fair systems that when they're using AI. And then obviously the pace of change is super quick. We've all seen how advanced ChatGPT, for example, has been from when it kind of launched with, I think it was GPT-3 when it launched last year or the year before, and how that's evolved over time as well. I don't know if anyone's seen the latest model with Sora and how they've kind of launched video as well now. So yeah, it's all happening very, very quickly. But the conversation alongside that is evolving. Regulation is coming, so yeah, stay up to speed with those conversations as much as you can, because that will give you constant food for thought in terms of some of the things you could be thinking about needing to address, processes you might want to be putting in place, additional questions that you might want to be asking as things evolve as well. Making sure that you're ready for when the regulation does come in, because I think we're probably within the next 2 years, we'll probably start to see that regulation coming into force. Data minimization, which we just covered, best place to start. If you don't collect the data, the personal data that is, then you just have no issues. But if you do collect it, then obviously just minimizing the use of that data. And then, yeah, just this concept of the fact that anonymization and encryption can really combine to protect and control access to data. I think that covers all the points I kind of wanted to make. I think the really kind of, when I was preparing for the session, a lot of it is probably kind of obvious or things that you might be doing in one guise already, but in the context of AI, it's just then taking it a step further really, and really thinking about the interaction with these AI systems, thinking about what could go wrong if you are sharing data with these systems, don't have that kind of safe data exchange. And then crucially, because of the way that the technology is advancing so quickly, many of you probably won't be able to build your own systems. And if you do, you won't be able to maintain them. And so will likely be looking to third-party software. So having the basics in terms of understanding on this front just means that you can have the sensible conversations that you need to with vendors when you are looking at bringing in some of these tools and implementing those in your service or within your organizations. So yeah, that covers everything on my end. I think we've gone through in record time, which is probably great for you. You get lots of time back. Just looking at the comments. I don't think none of these are questions, so that's fine. Thank you for your feedback, Karen. I really appreciate it. Matt, you've got another question. I just saw your hand go up.
Yeah, sorry, it's me again.
No, don't apologise.
Yeah, so it's really helpful, thank you. And I think a really good place to start is to review our current data protection security policies to incorporate AI, because I mean that just at the start of a term would be the most sensible thing I think that we could do, and then it's really trying to understand as it develops how much of an impact it may have on the existing policies or updated policies. So I think that's one takeaway of what we're going to do. Is just review it with AI in mind.
Yeah. I'm glad you got that takeaway. And I think it's I don't want to say simple, but I think it's an easy first step to get started with making sure that you're thinking about AI safety. It's just really kind of reflecting on where the gaps might be in internal policies and processes for sure. Thank you, Sarah. Just looking at the comments, sorry. Nina. Yeah, I don't think you're alone. There's lots going on in the AI space, so there's a lot to cover. But yeah, I'm glad that this was a good start for you. Yeah, any other questions or comments or observations or anything that I can help with whilst you've got me on the call?
Now's your chance, people. Come on.
No problem, Ian. Yeah, every day is a learning day, even for me. So don't worry, Nina. Contact details. Yeah, I'll put those in the chat. Sorry, I should have added that to the slide. So yeah, I'm always a bit of an AI fanatic. So happy to always have conversations about AI generally. I'm really passionate about the sector and just supporting. So honestly, if there's things that you want to get a second opinion on, feel free to reach out. If you're thinking about and building out AI strategies and want some input, again, feel free to reach out. My colleague internally as well is even more of an expert, so happy to connect you with him if that's useful as well. And then if you want to have any conversations about Earlybird and anything we can do to support, then please also let me know. But yeah, my email address is in the chat, and yeah, feel free to reach out. I'm also on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me there. I sometimes post about AI in different ways, so that might help you stay up to date with what's going on in the conversation.
Ian had a hand up and then it went down, so.
Oh, sorry, I missed that.
That's because no, you may have answered it already. To be honest, Claudia.
Oh, sorry, guys. I accidentally raised my hand. I'm good now. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
But thank you for that, Claudine. And yeah, I'd echo the comments in the chat as well. It's about how helpful it's been and laid out really clearly.
Thank you. Cool, no worries. I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.